Oh my gosh, welcome to Leading Through Stories. Thank you to everybody that is here with us today. A big part of Leading Through Stories is engagement with our community. Based on the feedback we got after the first 2 episodes, we know that we're going to stick with our 20-minute timeline of our plan of what we're talking about, and then we'll stay around for a while longer to answer any questions or just kind of keep a conversation going. So feel free to stick around if you have the time today. This week, we are talking about the gift of grief. And one of the questions that was sent to us before the show was, what ways can you support people sharing their stories of grief and personal struggle? We want you to take a second right now and throw an idea into the chat. So if you're on YouTube right now, just add a comment. What's a way you can support people sharing their stories of grief and personal struggle? We are going to come back to that after we get through our intro.
We believe everyone is a leader from where they stand and that we all have a story to tell.
And by sharing our stories, we create connections, we build relationships, we support ourselves and each other through those comfortable conversations, but also some of those very uncomfortable experiences.
Leading Through Stories is an authentic conversation about successes, learnings, and sometimes the things we would rather forget.
And so we're looking forward to having these conversations with you, our community. Note, we just want to remind everybody that this session is recorded, so consider what you're sharing as it will be available online. At the end of today's session, we're going to be raffling one of Helen's books, 53 Grove Road. Yay, Helen. Congratulations again. Your participation in the comments will include you in the draw. So if you scroll down below, what we'd like you to do right now is take a minute, write down your first and last name, and maybe tell us one thing about you.
And I'm throwing a question in there as well. That's why I'm typing and looking crazy.
Thank you for doing that. That's
to write
excellent.
this at the same time. There we go. Maybe that'll get people writing something. All right. Who we are. Mary Michaelides is a leadership development consultant and educator. She is passionate about life and supporting others in living well to lead well.
And our Christy Wolf is a photographer, a medical mama, and Wolfpack warrior who helps others to narrate their experiences through digital storytelling. Very powerful stuff Christy does.
And Helen Rose is an author, motivational speaker, and grief recovery specialist. Helen really has found her gift when she learned how to embrace her story, and it's an interesting one, and we're so delighted that you're going to share that with us today, Helen, about vulnerability and brokenness.
Okay, so we got to fit this in a little bit of time, and I could talk for hours about this. So I just want to start it off, as you may be triggered today as we're talking about some of the grief experiences. If you are, please reach out to any one of us, and we're there for you if you need. I'm going to just share my screen here quickly.
Friends, we practiced this beforehand. We're going to see if this works right now. We haven't tried sharing from another person.
Is it?
I don't have anything yet.
Oh, you don't have
it's
anything?
Not there yet.
It's coming. It's coming.
Okay.
And while that's happening, Stephanie, thank you for your commenting and sharing their story. So the message that was probably a hard thing to share is validated. Also sharing how their story connected with yourself. We've got lots of ideas coming in the comments now. So thanks guys for adding your ideas of how you can support people. Helen, I still don't have the share.
You know what? I'm just going to leave it because we don't have a lot of time because we'll cover it another time. So I just want to give a little.
You know what? We'll make sure to add that in the takeaway email.
Yeah.
I'll get those pictures.
So I want to share what my journey with grief started when I was born. I was born into the foster care system, shuttled between 8 foster homes between my birth mother and foster homes till I was 2.5. I was subsequently placed into a foster home that did adopt me when I was 4, and it was also a disaster. So the thing about grief when we're talking is I didn't realize, 2 years old, you're not sure what grief is, especially in 1960s. So when I wrote the book 53 Grove Road in 1999, someone who had read it had said, "Oh, wow, lots of grief you've experienced." And I remember thinking, well, what does that like, what is that? And so I think we're lucky enough to be where we are in our times, especially in these times, is we have we're starting to have a big awareness of what grief means. I think a lot of us thought it meant to do with just death. And it means to do, along with death, loss of any kind. So it could be loss of marriage, relationship, job, home, pets is a big one. That's a big one I tell people, is yes, people can grieve the loss of their pets greatly. And we never really understood the emotional tsunami that comes along with the grieving process. So Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and Christy, you will post this when I get it to you. What we think, she had come up with the notion of the 5 steps of grief. And in fact, as we're moving into more awareness and we're learning more and more about it, there are definitely more steps. But the ones that we all kind of think about are denial, anger, bargaining, acceptance, and depression. And in fact, when Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was dying, she realized that there was probably a few more steps that she had gone through her own experience she didn't realize, right? So the thing that we have a notion is that grief is linear. So we're going to go through each one of those emotions, and then we're done. It's a one and done. Nope. People, grief, we were just talking about this earlier before we started the podcast, is it's all of those things, and it can happen over a span of 30 years. When I'm going to give a quick example. I was working with a client whose husband was has early onset dementia, and she's just kind of in this zombie shock stage of, she's losing her husband. He's very young. So she was at the store one day. She's unloaded the shopping cart, puts it back, turns around, and the lady's like, "Oh, excuse me, you need to move that cart." Well, she just boom, blew sky high. This anger came out of nowhere. And she thought, oh my gosh, like, oh, thank God I'm not going to see her ever again. And in fact, the next day, the woman did walk into her place of work, but she didn't recognize her. But whatever. The point to that was that anger came out of nowhere. And it happens. And one of the things that we talk about when we're talking about grief, if we do 10 steps forward, the 10 steps could cross 40 years. And that anger will pop out of nowhere because something has happened that's triggered. So that's what I was talking about earlier when we were talking about triggers. So, yeah. So
I'm holding up my Post-it note for a second, because I want to go back to today's question, which is, what does grief mean to you? Because as we keep talking, we'll get people to add into the chat, and then we'll come back to more of what Helen's talking about. But let me just throw that question up there. What does grief mean to you? Mary, what does it mean for you?
You know, Christy, it's interesting. I've been thinking long and hard about this. And I believe that it's an integral part of this thing called humanism. Grief is a natural process for all of us. And, I was saying a little earlier, it comes in all sizes. It comes in all shapes. Sometimes God stops us right in the face. And sometimes it just creeps in month by month by month. And, you may be grieving anything that you've lost to a significant loved one, a child, God forbid, or even access to freedom. I mean, I'm thinking of COVID and that grief that we've all experienced. And sometimes it's even a career, transitioning from one spot in your career to the next. It's a loss of something. And when I think about grief, it truly is, Christy, based on the question that we've posed out there, an emotional reaction to change. And how I may respond to change might be very different than anybody else. So that's what it means to me.
Mm-hmm. And I had mentioned that I'm just started listening to a podcast by Dr. Maya Shakur. It's called A Slight Change of Plans. And she talks about how it's a process. Her podcast is a process for people to experience their change out loud. And I really like that, because for me, grief has been often around a change. Maybe it's a death, but it's also having a kid early, having a kid that has heart conditions. And I really do think of all these non-death grief stories as stories of change. And so that one has really made a difference. I'll throw that podcast into the takeaway email too, because I'm honestly in love with it right now. This is also Prematurity Awareness Day. And this is like a day that our son was born 8 weeks early. This is just something that I think about. That was probably the number one thing that threw me into photography, was processing through what happened for us with photos. So yeah, grief.
It's interesting,
all over the place.
Christy, you talk about that premature, day, and we had twins, and obviously most twins are premature, but there is that part of your brain that kind of says, oh my God, what if they don't make it? She's only, ounces of weight. And so it's interesting as it starts to kind of scaffold and get you to think differently about where you are, where you might want to be, and, what are the processes attached to that.
Yeah. And one of the things about grief that we do is we prioritize it based on someone else's. It's like, well, at least you're not dealing with that, right? I mean, even so, to your point, Mary, if you had your twins and one didn't survive, people would in their need to make you feel better or themselves feel better. Well, at least one survived. And it's like, and there is no malintent. I'm sure of it. It's not. But we do that, and we need to stop doing that, because what I'm grieving. So I'm going to give an example of when I was getting divorced. A friend of mine, her husband passed away unexpectedly. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, what am I worried about? I'm just getting divorced. That's got to stop, because when you do that, it diminishes immediately what that person is going through or what you're going through. Yeah.
That's that comparative grief piece, right? Like, just because your story is different doesn't mean it has any more value or less value than what somebody else is dealing with.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of Brene Brown's, short little video on empathy versus sympathy. And she talks about that comparison, and there is no comparison here.
Yeah.
And it's just, some of you have been using the word listen, encourage. I love that. How are we patient? And speaking less and listening more is a great strategy, I think.
Yeah, it's a real.
Okay, so let's talk about this book though, because I don't want to run out of time. I want to talk about this book.
Helen, you've got a title here. I was looking at this, 53 Grove Road. Tell me a little bit about why you chose that title.
So when I first wrote the book, the working title was called She, because I wrote it in third person, because it was extraordinarily difficult to rewrite my journey. And then I was thinking, my journey is not, and here I'm going to diminish it, it's not unique. It's not, there are far worse stories. There's far better stories. 53 Grove Road is just a fictional place, because you never know what's going on behind someone's closed door.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Could be anywhere.
It is anywhere.
And I've read this book a couple times, and I find the ending the hardest part. But one of my favorite lines in here is on page 39, and it says, "Are you running away from your own story?" the little girl asks me. I shut the door on her. I can't deal with her anymore. And that was the beginning, but you keep bringing this little girl back in. It comes with like talk of your counselor and all of those things. And guys, this was a really powerful book. I haven't been in the foster care system, but this to me really helped me understand what that experience would be like.
Yeah.
And, and interesting, Christy, we're both educators, Christy. And so for me, as I read your book, Helen, it was hard, but good at the same time. It's a great read. It reminded me of so many of our kids that we have had to deal with that have been in foster care. But as I reflected on your story and my kid's story, yours in particular, Helen, and I have a question for you. I saw sprinkles of glitter throughout this entire journey, and the words that popped out for me were on page, 41, where you talked about your genuine concern and love that you had in your turmoil. I mean, in your craziness, you babysat three boys, and you display, you had one of them on your hip, and you babysat them. And there was this stream of love that came from those pages. So in amongst all your trials and tribulations. So here's my question to you, Helen. And when we were in Canmore last week, I kind of asked that question as well. Yeah. What does survival look like for you? Like how did you get past all of that?
It's such a great question because I would love to have an answer for you. I think I was also in the depths of being born into what I was born into. I think there was always that little eternal optimist in Helen, and I still have it. Survival for me means that I remember when I was little, and I remember thinking, even then, how messed up this was. It just never felt good. And there was somewhere, maybe I have a lot of angels with me or what, but I just never gave up. And that's why I'm so passionate about what I do, is to find the gift. So the gift for me is the survival, that I can share my story. And I have a beautiful family. I have incredible friends. I have friends all over this planet. It's fabulous. I'm doing exactly what I want to do. I'm living what I want to live. Is it easy? Nope. There's lots of times when I get triggered about things people have said to me or whatever. But what is now, I carry that bit of survival is the awareness and always working with that little girl that's in here. In fact, someone recently said to me, I'll quite often refer to her as in third person. She's really sad. Didn't realize I was doing it. And she said to me, you know, Helen, she is you, and you have to love her. It was really powerful. Yeah. So I think does that answer it about survival? Yeah. I'm quite proud of the walk that I have now and what I've learned and how I carry it. Does not mean it's still easy. When we're talking about that, grief never really goes away. It is a constant thing for me, but I carry it well, mostly.
And what a gift you are to all of us, Helen.
Oh,
Thank you.
thanks, Mary. And I feel the same about you and Christy. Yeah.
Little love fest going on over
No
here.
kidding. Yeah.
So that kind of brings us back to that question that we started with. In what ways can we support other people? Helen, did you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah. So, and as the Annettes in our group have said, is to listen and just walk beside. That's all you need to do. And if any of us are thinking about something that's happened that we grieved, we just really need to know we have a safe spot that we can be deep into that emotion, because that's part of the healing, is to eat that emotion and really walk through it. It sucks and it's really hard, but you can't actually make someone else feel better other than just to walk beside, listen, and love them. They know you're there. That's why they feel comfortable enough to break down in front of you. In fact, even my friend that, my client that broke down in front of that woman at the Safeway parking lot, that was her in her grief. And we did laugh about it after, but it was such a big release for her. So that's part of it too. Yeah, there's two sides of it: standing on this side and being the one who is grieving.
Yeah, I have a book that I really like, a friend of mine gave to me. It's called The Rabbit Listened, and it's a children's book, but it's talking about a child who has a loss. And in this case, it was like their tower of blocks got knocked over. And then all these different animals come and like, you should yell about it. You should cry about it. You should like build it again, all these things. And the kid is not ready for that. And so then this rabbit comes along and just listens. And it's a really accessible story about dealing with grief for any age. So it's one that I really like. I'll throw that in the takeaways as well.
It's interesting. Christy, as I hear that, our community out there, thank you for the interaction. I mean, you're giving us some amazing thoughts, but Charmaine, I love what you've just said, that notion of survival, and becoming comfortable walking beside fear. Like, it's right here. It's part of our human existence. And sadness, how do we walk beside towards new experience with hope, joy, acceptance, and friends, colleagues, mentors, whoever those may be. So, Charmaine, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and that is beautiful, Charmaine. And it is being able to also recognize that your fear that you're not going to ever feel better. It's also to recognize that sometimes you need to reach out. It's also good to recognize sometimes you just need to lay in bed and cry all freaking day. Whatever it works, right? I think we've created this notion that we're always supposed to be this polished, happy version of it. I mean, Mary and Christy know me well. Annette Stanwyck, who's always one of our biggest fans, knows me well. There are times when I'm just really down, and that is my grief journey. Yeah.
Okay, I put up the take back, bring back.
I got it.
Sharon,
I
yes,
got
we
it. I
need to
got it.
move it along.
Yeah. So Helen, you've got some exciting things that are coming up ahead in the horizon. Quickly tell us about things for us to look forward to, and then I'll talk about that take back, bring back piece.
Okay, so very quickly, one of the many things that's happening, September 1, 2022, come join me in Greece for an 11-day journaling retreat. We're going to stop at Mary's cousin's olive oil factory. That is so exciting. So Christy's going to post the link for that. So excited to do this journaling retreat in Greece.
Thank you so much. And for our community out there, we've got something called a take back, bring back. We will be sharing with you the Brene Brown video on empathy versus sympathy. We've got a beautiful feeling wheel that you and your family could be reflecting on, or those that you work with can take a look at. We've got a short article that came our way this morning from Covenant Health that it's absolutely amazing. Grief is messy. And we will continue to we would like you to come to us via email with any other thoughts, ideas, suggestions that you may have in supporting our work in moving forward with this work.
And just feel free to tell us what resonated with you in today's podcast. We are starting to think about what the new year looks like. We only planned into December. And so the questions that we get, the comments that we get are what helps us decide what we're going to be talking about into the future. So please continue to share with us your thoughts. We know that grief has been a big one that people are looking into talking about. So thank you for sharing.
And, we're looking forward to December 15th. I can't believe that it's already December 15th soon.
Yeah.
The next topic will be living well to lead well. And as you know from our first podcast, we are all leaders from where we stand. Come join us, send a friend, invite a friend. The big question will be, how are we living well to lead well? We'll have strategies, tool, resources, and we have some local companies in our city that have been so kind and genuine and generous, and there will be many raffles that we'll be giving out for Christmas in light of the spirit of Christmas as well.
Love it.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to hang out here. This is technically done. We're done, cut, but we're just going to keep chatting and kind of come back to some of the things that people put in the chat. If you have any questions that you'd like us to address, feel free to stick around. We can't pull people on, but we can definitely talk about questions that come up in the chat. And now, Helen can just keep telling us about grief, because I know we had so much more to say.
There's just so much more. I mean, I could do it for hours and hours talking about the experience. And I think one of the things that I always say is that when you recognize how difficult it is to walk from, I always talk about this side of the river is when you first start and you go through the mud and you slog right through on the other side, the feeling that of who you know yourself better too. It's a big self-awareness piece. You're comfortable with your experiences. But having said that, when you get a trigger, could be 40 years down the line, you're right back here. But the beauty is you don't slog through it as hard. And that is the beauty, is to do the work. And I mean, I don't know if there's anybody has any questions about grief.
Wait, I'm going to throw something in there right now. Look at what Annette said. So Annette won the first book, Instructional Talk-Throughs. That's Mary's book. And she just said she's been using it in her adult learning course.
Yeah.
Speaking with confidence. That's awesome to hear. And I think Steph, you were the person that won the second book. I don't know.
Nice.
I love that you guys are back in here today.
I think one of the things that I would throw out there for today's is think about some of the things that people have said to you when you're in those depths of, those depths of despair, and you're just trying to figure it all out and you're all in a jumble. Some of the things people have said where you're just like, huh? Like, what? I think that is something to think about, not in terms for what you're grieving. Well, I guess so, in yourself too, because you'll say it to yourself. Oh, what do you worry? I have a friend who's battling cancer. She's 69 years old, and she's like, well, I've had a good life. Look at these poor children battling cancer. It's like, whoa, that's not, you need to honor your journey. Not their journey is their journey. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Helen, I'm wondering, would we be brave enough, if I'm sharing my grief story and I just want somebody to listen to me and they're telling me what I should do or shouldn't do and tell me how grateful I should be. Wouldn't it be interesting to be brave enough to say, you know what, Christy, I just need for you to listen to me, right? To be brave enough to say that, because I think when we name it, then we can start kind of like Brene says, I've got a crush on her. Yeah, I know. But when we name it, we
We
start
all
to
have a
tame.
crush on her.
When we name it, we start to tame it. But to be able to kind of say, I had a conversation with one of our community members on online today, Kim, and she was sharing a bit of a significant grief story with me the other day. And I'm hoping that, Kim, I was listening to you, and if I wasn't, I'm hoping that you would be able to say, Mary, I just want you to listen. Just listen to me, because I think sometimes we want to fix, we want to make it all okay, and
and to that point, Mary, when two people can have the same loss and completely process it differently. I did a grief support group here for 18 months for adults who lost adult children, and there were six couples, and each one of them dealt with it differently, and each couple dealt with it differently, not together. And I think that's really important when you're saying, can you just listen? And it's not, it's like, let's give an example of, I don't know, I lost my job and I'm really unhappy, and what am I going to do now, and what's my future look like, and all that. Oh, well, when I lost my job, this is what I did. Like, you really need to zip it. That's one of the things, right? Because they're going to process it differently, even though it's the same.
So Joanna,
I just had a thought and I totally lost it, but because I was like busy looking at comments, trying to put them in so you guys would see them as well. Yeah. But I thought this was really nice from Kim. Like, you're right. Listening is such a big piece of it, and just holding space for that person. Oh, I know what I was going to do.
You're making me cry, Kim.
Uh-oh, did you bring tissues? I haven't started doing that to these yet. Shameless plug, digital storytelling, that chance to process and tell your story with somebody that's just listening is exactly what I'm hoping to do with people. Because I think that one part of it is telling your story over and over is not an easy thing to do. And having some kind of recorded version of it that you can share and then kind of go to questions is a really important thing. So I don't know. I know that, and one of the things that I kept thinking about, because Helen and I had talked about doing a digital story, and when I walked in her house for the first time, she showed me there's like a shelf of toys that you have, and you were talking about the little girl, and at that time I hadn't read the book yet, and after reading the book, it just like all these little pieces started to come together even more, right?
Yeah, so to that, I keep 3 shelves in my living room of my books when I was a little girl, the Flintstones, which I love. That's my nod to the childhood that I didn't get. And so, is there a bug in your room, Christy?
No, it's like the lights turned off. There we go.
So that's my kind of my ode to my childhood, which was really lost for me. One of the things that I think we should touch on today too is collectively, there's a whole bunch of different kinds of grief, including collective grief, anticipatory grief. I think the world right now is in this weird anticipatory limbo, not really sure we know what we've lost or going to lose. Would you agree with that? And it's difficult enough to talk about your grief journey when you're not, when you haven't done it before, because it always is kind of just bubbling here, I think, for people who haven't dealt with it, and it just kind of comes overflowing. I think that's why I think a lot of people are on edge, because we just don't know what our future looks like. It's a frightening place to be, and we can't grieve anything because we haven't necessarily, I'm not talking about losing people to COVID and stuff, but just on our own safety here in terms of our jobs, in terms of maybe losing our family members to COVID, ourselves, you know what I mean? I think that's a really important thing to talk about. I mean, it's good to be really positive, but I think we're all kind of like, oh, what's going to happen next, right?
Interesting,
you know what I'm also thinking about right now? How much I love this part at the end where we're just talking. rather than like the structured stuff. I cannot wait
we're
to
not going to do the structured stuff anymore.
I know, we're moving away from that.
Yeah, I love it.
Helen, just one note.
Sorry, Mary, go ahead.
That's all right. Thank you for reminding us of that, because I don't want to script anymore. But anyway, the whole idea of the gift of grief, and I'm going to go back to the word C, and I hate using it because, we've all been inundated with COVID, but the gift of, there were many challenges and many losses that have been lost, lives that have been lost, but there are some significant gifts in what I have witnessed with what COVID has brought. And it reminds me, and I didn't make the connection until this very second, Helen, when you said that, the gift of empathy, the gift on checking in on somebody, the gift of saying, we don't need to do it all, the gift of quiet and peace and family time. Thank you, Helen, for that reminder.
Can we make that one of our episodes in the new year about just like the positives that come from grief? Because honestly, there are so many things in my life that never would have happened if I had not had a premature son who needed heart. Like the connections that I have with people because of the things that were tragic.
Well, look at the three connections we have with the three of us. Would not have happened.
Yeah. I like that. I like that idea, Christy.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
January.
Good.
Yeah. Come on.
Yeah. And I think that when you're talking about that gift, that's what my company name is, the gift of being present. And I talk about grief. Everything's around my little island of grief. And I know if you listen to any of my other podcasts, Sharing Stories with Helen Rose, shameless advertising.
I love it.
Every single story, and even when you're hearing motivational speakers, they will always say, if I could go back and change it, I wouldn't, because they're so grateful to be standing here. But the trick is you have to go through that process before you're grateful and found your gift, right? I think we try and rush the gift in it. And it's like, just give it over to the universe. It's going to come back to you how it's supposed to, if you have that trust. Not easy to do.
No, and definitely like takes months or years before you're ready to see those things.
Yeah, I was doing a book reading one time in Banff, and this woman stood up, and she was in her late 70s, and she had shared with the room that she had been sexually assaulted by her father when she was little. And do you know, in her early 70s, at my book launch, was the first time she revealed it. She had carried that with her for 70 years.
Yeah. And I think opening up that conversation about, like, every time that I've talked about something, let's say my dad's suicide, I talked about it for 6 years and someone always followed me. There was one person that was always kind of would make a comment. And then 6 years after my dad's death, she came out that it was her mom's suicide 25 years before. Like, that was the first time she said it. And just, you never know what is happening for other people behind the scenes and what you talking about it might mean for somebody else to be able to talk about it, or just like to think about it and leave space for that as well.
Yeah. And if someone starts yelling at you in the Safeway parking lot because you told them to put that that shopping cart away, and they've just gone to Pluto because they've blown up, there may be a reason why. No, I'm not suggesting that you should go and doing that, but
just shake a fist.
Yeah, that's right. But that is a thing of unresolved grief or unrecognized grief. Is anger is a big one. It's a big emotion. And I know I was angry for most of my young life, and I didn't even know why. Of course, now it makes sense, right?
Well, and our community and us three are women, and it's Movember. It's men's mental health. People are talking about that right now as well. And just like the differences in how people approach it regardless of gender, but just everyone has a different way to process grief and how it shows up for them.
Yeah. And it may well be unrecognized. And that's what my journey is but it has to have had a reason for it to happen. Right?
I would like to think so. I don't actually believe that, but
I know. That's a big pill to swallow. I agree. It's like, I think it just goes further beyond, is once you've dealt with your grief and you're going forward and you're sharing sharing, Christy, because of what you went through. Mary, you're sharing for what you went through. I'm sharing for if that can be the gift and giving back to someone else who wasn't lucky enough to have those angels and those landing pads and all of that, then oh boy, if you could just help one person recognize it and help them be able to carry their experiences, then it's totally worth it.
All right, team, should we wrap this up?
I think so. Thank you
Okay.
to our amazing community out there. We have felt your blessings as we read through your notes. For those of you who are out there and have not contributed to the notes, that's all right as well. If you have feedback for us, as we said earlier on, send us a note and potential topics for maybe February and maybe March. But
well, and we're planning to send out a Google form with some, like, give us some ideas as well. So the people on our mailing list, we will be asking specifically for your feedback down the road as well.
Excellent.
Anyways.
Thank you.
All right.
Oh my gosh, I love it.